Our thanks to our patrons for helping meet expenses. You can help out this volunteer effort by becoming a patron for as little as $1 a month. Go to patreon.com/Omaha.
Welcome to the North Omaha History Podcast with noted author and historian Adam Fletcher Sasse. Each week, Adam takes you on a guided tour through Omaha's dynamic past.
Wagons rolling across the wispy plains with grasses blowing about. Storms rolling in from the distance and you can see them 100 miles away. American Indians and their tribes sitting up on the hillsides watching down on these caravans of pretty settlers coming from the east and going to Nebraska and beyond. These are some of the romantic visions that we have of the first roadways through Omaha, Steve. But in reality, it was a much different picture. Omaha was a busy place long before the city ever existed. Believe it or not, in the 1840s, people were coming through Omaha on a road trying to get west. Now, some of these folks stopped. There were early fur trappers and different hunters and people who lived in Omaha. Of course, there was a great settlement down at Bellevue and even another settlement further north in a little area that was called Cutler's Park. The first roads, the first streets, the first pathway that anybody made through Omaha, though, didn't belong to any white person. Instead, they belonged to those tribes. The Ponca, the Odo, and many other tribes used the Omaha area to travel through all of the time. And because of that, they had the first trails. I've surmised that those trails went down along the water's edge at the Missouri River today, from Dodge Street way north beyond Dodge Park. Those trails also went along the cliff side, the cliff that separates East Omaha from North Omaha, just east of 14th Street and east of Florence Boulevard. That cliff had its own trail that went along it, and that trail turned out to be really important. But the first roads through Omaha were probably made by those Native Americans, not hundreds of years ago, but thousands of years ago. They were small, they were trails, but they were rarely lost and they were often used. They were used by those first settlers that I mentioned, but there were also other folks going through. We're all familiar with the 49ers, not the San Francisco football team, but the 49ers who were gold seekers that were going to California from the east, and they were going to California to find that gold. They came through the Omaha area on an early roadway. But the very first official roads, the very first official streets cut by white people in the Omaha area were actually not in the city of Omaha itself early on. Instead, they were in this little area called Cutler's Park, way to the north of Omaha. Over at the intersection of Young Street and Mormon Bridge Road today, there was a town. This town was founded by the Church of Latter-day Saints as they were traveling west. They're early Mormons. They were traveling west to Salt Lake in 1846. And they made a town at Young Street and Mormon Bridge Road. And that was the first platted streets in Omaha, right there on that intersection. Now, a couple months in, they had to move their town. So they ended up moving it to the area that we call Florence today and that they called Winter Quarters. Winter Quarters had a grid pattern street system that was laid out for the convenience of those early settlers. Those streets included Cutler Street, Cahoon Street, Pratt Street, Woodruff Street, Russell Street, Smith Street, Joseph Street, Hiram Street. You get the idea. All these names that we don't even know today. The streets ran east to west from the Missouri River, west to about 33rd Street that we know today. And then there were two streets that headed north and south. One of those streets was called First Main Street. The second one of those streets was called Second Main Street. And today we know those as 29th and 30th Streets. So those are the very first streets cut in the Omaha area. They were laid flat, they were tilled, made flat by the people who walked on them, but also by teams of horses and plows that intentionally cut up the streets to get ruts in them so that people could walk easier. There were wooden sidewalks put along the edges of the street, and that actually went on for the next 50 years after, and more. Now, that was the first street in the Omaha area. The first street in Omaha proper actually was laid out as early as 1850, which again was before the city of Omaha was founded in 1854. It was 1850 when the U.S. Army cut a road through the Omaha area that we today call the Military Road. The Military Road went from the Missouri River all the way up to the town of Fremont. And in that space and in that time, that was the most extensive road in the city. Now, that road was really important because it carried all those early settlers through what became Omaha and really enticed people to consider staying in the area. The early starting point of Military Road was actually what we know as California Street today. It was all the way down at the river. It went from the river all the way up to about 31st Street today. And then it cut through the present-day neighborhood that is north and west of 30th and Cumming. It went all the way up to 33rd and Parker and then dropped back down to the street today that we call Hamilton. And that was Military Road. And Military Road was the important carry-through for all the traffic in Omaha before the city was ever founded. Now, Military Road had wagons and it had carts, it had oxen, and it had settlers and all kinds of people traveling along it. So you can believe that the first businesses that we understand as businesses were located on the Military Road. But it's also important to understand, Steve, that all of that area from the river along California Street, all the way to 31st, up to 33rd and Parker, all the way back down to Hamilton, and then leading out to where we understand Military Avenue is today, all of these streets, all of this area, that all preceded what we understand as Omaha today. See, all of that was put down for those settlers. So we had businesses along there. We had some early homesteads along there. Today, only part of the entire Military Road from the river all the way out to Fremont, only part of it is recognized for its historical value. And that's all the way out at 84th and Military Road. There's a little segment there that's just off the street today that is actually preserved as part of the National Register of Historic Places. That's about 82nd and 4th Streets. So they're cobblestones that are still there now, so you can see that if you're so interested. But that was really the first street in Omaha, Military Avenue. Now from there, of course, we know that early Omaha filled up quick. The streets were platted and laid out in 1854 by Alfred Jones, who was an early surveyor who worked for the settlement company that started selling lots in the Omaha area later on. But Alfred Jones really identified those first streets that we understand in downtown Omaha today. And it was a busy, busy hive of streets. I mean, all kinds of things going down there that we could explain and go over. But rather than getting really detailed about that, I think it's fun to just focus on some of the historic street names that are long gone. You know, we don't ever talk anymore about Buffalo Street or Elk Street or Antelope Street, but all of those used to be in downtown Omaha. And we don't really mention Saunders Street anymore, even though that's become North 24th. And nobody's called it Sherman Avenue in a long time, even though a lot of people seem to know that's North 16th. Instead, we talk about the streets that we all remember, but maybe one of the most important streets that I forget about that doesn't even exist anymore, it ran at a diagonal. The only diagonal street that cut through downtown Omaha into North Omaha was called Canal Street. And Steve, it was called Canal Street because the intention was to run a canal from the Missouri River over to the North Creek. Now, all that's a little bit complicated, but the long story short is it never came to pass. And there's no signs of that street ever existing. But at one point, Canal Street was going to run from Grace Street all the way down to Paul Street in the what we know of as the Omaha Bottoms today, down by 11th Street. I find these street stories to be super interesting, Steve, for so many reasons, because it's really the heart of the city. It's really what carries us today. Luckily, some people are beginning to understand the value of streets. For instance, it was the National Register of Historic Places that put more than 10 of Omaha's boulevards they listed them on the National Register of Historic Places because of their historic value. But what I also find interesting, aside from the streets that still exist today, are the ones that don't exist anymore. Let's get into that in a minute. But first, let's back up and keep going over those early streets. You see, early Omaha, I'm talking from the 1850s through the 70s, it wasn't a progressive place. It was filled with civic-minded boosters who wanted everything beautiful for everyone. Instead, Omaha was a scruffy, determined business center where the goods were stored to stock the wagon trains that went west. Because of that, it took more than 25 years after Omaha's founding for the city leaders to get serious about paving the streets. And when they talked about paving the streets back then, Steve, they weren't talking about nice asphalt laid down every couple of years. Instead, they were talking about using granite, sandstone, brick, cedar blocks, and cypress blocks. That's right, wood blocks to pave the streets of Omaha. Some of the first streets in Omaha that were paved with those devices were in North Omaha. Dodge Street from 8th to 24th was one of the first sections that was ever paved in Omaha. Capitol, again from 8th to 24th. Davenport, Chicago, Cass Street, California, Webster, Burt, Cumming, and Izzard Streets were all the first ones to be paved in the whole city in the 1870s. And when they were paved, most of them were paved with a type of what was called macadam. Macadam was very loose cut-up rock. You can still get it to put on your home landscaping. But others were California Street and Cass Street in Chicago. They were all paved with cedar block. Dodge Street, a large section of Dodge Street from about 17th on to about 30th was paved with cedar block, believe it or not. There were big sections of downtown Omaha that had cypress block all over them. And then one of the things that I find most interesting is that sandstone, they used huge sandstone slabs to pave the earliest forms of 16th. So lots of different things going on in that early paving. And like I said, they didn't use those same devices to pave the sidewalks next to the streets, if you had sidewalks at all. Instead, they used wood. They made wood plank sidewalks going along these dusty brick, stone, macadam, and all kinds of different forms of the street coverings. Now, at some point after 1870, they started putting tar on top of the macadam, and they made the earliest forms of asphalt that way. Later on, they put tar on top of the brick and the stone and the wood, too. There are sometimes when the city of Omaha cuts back the streets that you can actually see these levels. Somebody reported seeing down to the wood level on Dodge Street 4 years ago on Facebook. So we know that those levels still exist. They were never really pulled up. They were just laid on top of. And that's still happening today. By 1905, the only streets between 16th and 24th that had any paving on them of any kind, north of the downtown area, north of Cumming really, were Nicholas, Paul, Clark, Grace Street, Lake Street, Corby, Binney, and Emmett Streets. That's like 7 streets out of 24 that went north of Cumming Street. And then 3 dozen, and then 4 dozen by 1905. That's awful late in the city's history. That's more than 60 years on. And during that time, people didn't really know or appreciate the value of that paving. But once they got a hint that the paving increased their home value and their business value, they totally ramped up efforts and went full steam ahead. They paved all over North Omaha as quickly as they could. The intersection of 30th and Ames was one of the starting points for paving everything in the exclusive Bemis Park neighborhood, in the Orchard Hill neighborhood, and further west of there, all the way to Dundee and beyond. So then North 40th Street was paved in asphalt from Dodge to Hamilton, and then from Hamilton to Military was in brick. But then from Military northward was all macadam. So you had multiple different kinds of street services all over the city. So 110 years ago, all of Omaha was covered by dirt roads. Instead of gravel and cracked streets, The main features of the streets were mud ruts, snow-covered drives, grass-covered streets, and holes big enough to hold pots. That's why they were called potholes. Now, those streets served a lot of purposes, though, Steve. And in time when they did improve, they had to make other improvements as well. Not only did sidewalks go in eventually, but also streetcars. As North Omaha was getting paved, those streetcar tracks were embedded straight into the brick lines that went north and south, or the asphalt lines that covered up the rest of the area. Now, a lot of people throw around different words for the streets in North Omaha. We talk about streets, avenues, boulevards, but what's really the difference? I don't want to get too far into it, but if anybody wants to learn more, check out the history of the streets in North Omaha on NorthOmahaHistory.com. But the important part to understand is that streets, avenues, boulevards, road, drive, lane, way, circle, all of those exist in North Omaha. There are courts, there are alleys, but there are also interstates, highways, freeways, expressways, parkways, and even other ways that Omahans get around using those streets in North Omaha. Now, we talked about the importance of the boulevards and really how those are being recognized for their historic value. But another interesting feature of Omaha streets that I think we need to mention are the bridges and trestles that really covered a lot of streetways throughout the neighborhood, throughout the community. Some of those bridges were the Illinois Central Bridge over the Missouri River. Now, that bridge was originally designed to carry pedestrian traffic and streetcar traffic and wagon traffic. That's right, Steve, that rusty old bridge over the river that goes between East Omaha and the Iowa side was made to carry 4 different kinds of traffic and then even had pedestrian sidewalks on it. Now, eventually all that came off, and today the whole entire bridge sits idle, but it did carry all that traffic at one point. There was a Union Pacific Bridge over the Carter Lake on Ames Street that carried foot traffic and wagon traffic as well as railroad traffic. That's gone now. The Locust Street Bridge over Carter Lake has been replaced by a causeway that's part of the street system. Now, you can't even tell that there was ever water underneath it. But at one point, there was a gigantic bridge that covered, and later on a trestle that covered over the railroad tracks right there just east of 16 going down into the city of Carter Lake. There were a lot of other bridges and trestles around North Omaha, too, different ones from people's memories. And then, of course, the streets themselves. One of the most intriguing parts about the streets for me, Steve, is all the different names. We know that each name in North Omaha, each name of a street came from somebody who was important at some point, but very few people actually know who that was. Check this out. Some of them are actually boring. Dodge Street, it wasn't named for anybody fancy. It wasn't named for the guy who started the NP Dodge real estate company. It was named for Augustus Dodge, an early politician that nobody remembers. Capitol Avenue, though, that was named for Capitol Hill. And Capitol Hill was called that because that's where the location of the first Nebraska Territory capital was. Today, it's the site of Central High School. Davenport Street was named for Davenport, Iowa. Just like Chicago Street, right in downtown, that was named for Chicago, Illinois. Now, we know Cass Street, that was named for a politician. His name was Jem Lewis Cass, and his name's been forgotten in history. I told you about California Street, named for that California gold rush, but Webster Street was actually named for the American pioneer Daniel Webster. There's a lot of other streets. Of course, they're all known and explored. And if you check out that history of streets in North Omaha on NorthOmahaHistory.com, you can learn a lot of others. There's obvious ones like Ohio Street and Miami Street, but then there was ones that are less obvious, like Binney Street, that was named for a politician named Horace Binney. It was originally called Cassius Street, by the way. Bedford Avenue was named for a politician, businessman, and landowner called Jefferson W. Bedford. So some of these are just boring. But then we have civic leaders who had streets named after them, like John J. Creighton Boulevard. John J. Creighton Boulevard was a rich man who helped found Creighton University, but also donated a lot of money around the city for different causes. Lincoln Boulevard was named for the president. There are lots of others. Axel Vergman Sorensen, the politician from Nebraska and businessman, he got the Sorensen Parkway named after him. And then, of course, Carter Boulevard was named for the businessman Levi Carter. So the list goes on, Steve, and you can check them all out. I also tracked the important intersections in North Omaha, and there are so many more than what I've written here, but check out that list and you'll see places like 16th and Cumming. 16th and Cumming used to be one of the most important intersections in all of Omaha. There was a gigantic Ford truck factory located right there, which today is the Tip Top Apartments. But there were other businesses that were all around that area, and it was so important to the entire city. 24th and Cumming had a lot of businesses that were packed right in on that corner, including drugstores and hotels and just different features like that, as well as the Creighton University, which was founded just up the street from 24th and Cumming. And then you have other intersections today, like 70th and Maple or 72nd and Dodge or Cumming and Saddle Creek Road, all kinds of things. And they're tracked right there on NorthOmahaHistory.com. Finally, I want to mention the use of Omaha's streets as weapons, because personally, I think it's one of the most fascinating things about Omaha's history. It's also a terrible sign of the white supremacy that has really dominated the city. But the long story short, Steve, is that at one point, North Omaha was the most connected part of Omaha. It had an interstate on the north end. It had an interstate on the south end. It had all kinds of streetcars and buses running throughout the neighborhood. But then the city leaders in Omaha, they developed a plan to bisect the African-American neighborhood. They wanted to cut it in half. Just like in cities across America, but unique to Omaha too, they dropped that highway right in the middle of the black neighborhood. It cut up between 27th and 28th Avenues from Dodge Street North, from Cumming Street North, all the way up to what we know as the Sorensen Parkway today. But back then, it was the end of the Miller Park neighborhood. And basically, that interstate destroyed that highway, destroyed 2,000 homes, churches, and businesses along that area. Now, it was originally made to be a highway. It was Interstate 580. They took away that interstate when the city of Omaha didn't fix up the roadway enough, and now it's called the North Freeway. But the North Freeway connects to the Sorensen Parkway and the Stords Expressway, and in the meantime, it's underused. It's underutilized. There are efforts and momentum to remove the highway and replace it with a normal streetway to carry business, to carry traffic into North Omaha from other parts of the city, but also to slow people down to really appreciate the beauty of the neighborhood that's around. Because that historic African-American neighborhood is packed with gorgeous homes, has great and vital history, and does wonderful things that's still in place today. Another one of North Omaha streets that was used as a weapon was North 16th. North 16th was this vibrant, super important streetway. Steve, imagine how important 72nd Street is today. That's what 16th was in its heyday, from about the 1870s through the 1960s. Omahans moved along North 16th from Dodge all the way up to East Omaha with no obstructions in between. But when the riots happened in North Omaha along 24th, along 16th, Omaha's civic leaders took it upon themselves to allow a hotel to be built on North 16th in the downtown core in order to block off North Omaha. They walled 3 major roadways in order to stop traffic flowing into North Omaha. This Hilton Hotel literally blocked all this traffic that used to go to North Omaha. And instead of being 72nd, it became 16th, a forgotten and neglected street that's run out of the important apartments, that's run out of the important businesses, that's run out of the importance that it once had to all of Omaha. There are other ways that the city of Omaha has used streets as weapons against North Omaha, including benign neglect, where they actually let the streets fall apart under taxpayers' feet. And while North Omaha residents are busy paying tax, and North Omaha property owners are busy paying taxes that they assume are going to fix up those streets, the city of Omaha has let the neighborhoods languish and let the property values fall. And the neighborhood could be doing a lot better if it was taken care of more. In recent times, though, there have been attempts to turn things around. We have a neighborhood-wide plan to put in a bike path to connect all of North Omaha. That's right. The plan to fix North Omaha streets is to put in a bike path. Go figure. There's been a little bit of rumbling about streetcars in Omaha again, but they'll never come back to North Omaha. Really, what we need is an effort to humanize the streets. The North 24th Street Business Improvement District is making an effort to make North 24th sidewalks more walkable again. and make North 24th Street a more pleasant streetscape. Hopefully that effort will spread throughout North Omaha and beautify areas like Florence and Dundee and old former commercial intersections like 42nd and Grand and 24th and Fort, and so many others have been neglected, denied, and otherwise forgotten. Because the streets in North Omaha, like every street in Omaha, all the way out to West Omaha, all the way down through South Omaha, the streets in North Omaha deserve to be remembered for their history. And that is the truth. My name's Adam Fletcher Sasse. Learn more at NorthOmahaHistory.com, a history of streets in North Omaha.
Thanks for listening to the North Omaha History Podcast with noted author and historian Adam Fletcher Sasse. Join us next week as Adam takes you on another guided tour through Omaha's dynamic past.